Let's do our thing.
Okay, I'm gonna pull up my cheat sheet.
Yep, I got mine ready too.
Are we waiting a little bit to let people in?
Oh, I thought you were letting him in.
I was waiting. I
It's
didn't
just,
hear.
I feel like,
You're kind of like,
I
okay, here we go.
I feel like we're on a long haul flight.
Okay, here they come.
We're lifting off.
All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to tonight's Learning and Mending. I'm going to start off by sharing with you our embroidery of the week. And this one is a pattern of, it's willow. And one of the reasons I wanted to share this because I was so inspired by this design because it's not only embroidery, but I believe applique as well. Basically, Naveen created this design. And it's one of the designs we sent out, but what's really cool is that she added fabric to fill in the plant. And I just thought that was such a unique way to handle this design. And I just love the use of the fabric. So if you're looking for something different to do to your embroidery piece, this is a beautiful idea and execution. So now, we'll go into a popcorn share of introductions. I'm Jen. I'm calling in from Studio City. And tonight, I will be working on my Mycelium Network Carbon Exchange. I did technically finish it last week, but then I had one of those moments of like, is it really done? So I've now started coloring inside with like a light gray. And it's really given a lot of pop and contrast between the white and the purple and the gray, and so it's given it another dimension. So I'm not done. I'm going to continue on until it feels right. So I will now pass this on to Olan.
Hello, made it by the skin of my teeth. I am Olan Jones. I'm calling in from West Hollywood. I am working on the parameciums within, or whatever. And glad to be here. And I'll pass it on to Diego.
Hi, I'm Diego. My pronouns are he, him. I'm calling from Ithaca, New York, and I'm gonna be helping with the readings and sharing the screen tonight. I'll pass it to Roxanne.
I am calling in from Venice, use she, her pronouns, and I am mending a sweater, my favorite sweater. And then maybe I'll work on my common raven again. And I don't know who's gone, so I'll take a chance with Andrea.
Hello, I'm Andrea, and I'm calling in from Mid-City Wilshire Center. And I just picked up my piece this week, and so I will be starting very slowly. And I think this is also, you know, everything within underground. And I use she, her pronouns, and I'm relatively new to the studio, and I've met a number of you, and I look forward to meeting more of you and getting to know you all. very soon. I will pass it to Cynthia.
Hi, I'm Cindy. I'm calling in from West Covina, and I'm also working on an enneagram pattern, but I just have to.
Oh, Cindy, I don't know if you can hear us, but I think you're frozen. Or at least she's for me.
Yep. She's got that great frozen Zoom face going. Happens to us
Okay,
all.
I
There
will.
she is.
Oh, you're back. We didn't hear you. Sorry, Cindy.
Okay, I'm just going to pass it to Alex because I might be having technical difficulties.
Okay. Alex?
Alex is frozen.
Oh, okay. Well, Cascade, you're not.
Cascade. Hi. Cascade, she, her, calling from where am I? I don't know. I'm just here to listen. I just want to see your faces and hear the words and be with you all. So that's what I'm working on. And I will pass it to Amy.
Thanks, Cascade. I'm here to listen and learn tonight too. I left my mending at my mom's house, even though I'm not very far along from way back when. Happy to be here.
Well, welcome back.
Oh, I'll pass it on to, who hasn't gone? Patricia?
Patricia Watts. I'm here. What am I doing? I'm signing in from, I don't know how to even talk right now, from Santa Fe, New Mexico, the unceded lands of the Tewa people. It's known as Ogopoge Whiteshell Water Place. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm gonna show you mine. I'm almost done. So I will be shipping it back to you tomorrow.
Oh, wonderful.
Yeah. Sorry. Diego, have you gone? You just went. Kelly, have you gone?
Not yet. I'm Kelly. I'm calling in from Seattle, Washington. She, her pronouns. And tonight I have very exciting news because I have a brand new mycelium embroidery to do. And I just did my very first 3 stitches. I have no idea what I'm doing, but I'm really excited. And this one is my favorite, the Mycelium Underground. So Jen knows me. So I'm very enthusiastic about this. And from there, I will popcorn it to, oh, we need names. DeRayner.
Hi, DeRayner, calling in from Baldwin Hills. I go by she, her pronoun, and I am almost finished. Well, let me take this blur background off so you can see. But I don't know if you can see, but I'm almost done. The yellow rump bird, and I will pass it on to Olan. Have you gone yet?
I have, but I forgot to say she, her pronouns. So, and now I'm signing off again. You have to find someone else.
Lauren, have you gone yet?
No. Hi, I'm Lauren. I'm using she, they pronouns. I'm working on this thing. I'm not sure what it is actually. It's from the underground. And I'm calling from Metabolic Studio on the LA River. And happy to be here tonight. And I will pass it to Kavi.
Good evening, everyone. Kyle, he, him pronouns, calling in from Sacramento. I just finished my embroidery, so it's in the mail. And before working on some sketches today, yeah. Just been doodling throughout the day while on calls and things, so probably continue a little bit of that. I joined a little late, so I'm not sure who was gone yet, but I think I saw Marianne joining a little later as well, so I'll pass it on to you.
You're muted.
Sorry. Hi, I'm Marianne Maley. I'm in Silver Lake. I use she, her. I'm working on the underground. I don't know if I have a hard time getting it. Now it's blurring with my background.
Oh, they.
And let's see. Has everyone? I just got here, so I don't know either. Olan, have you already shown your beautiful?
Yes, I have introduced myself again and again.
Olan, everybody's
Go, Olan.
I know Olan, I know Lauren, I know Jen.
Sylvia has not spoken up yet.
Hi, Sylvia. How about you?
Okay. Okay, great.
Oh,
I'll
there's
go.
Emily too. Okay, sorry.
Thank you. I'm Sylvia Holmes. I'm calling from Pasadena, California, on land sacred to the Tongva. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm working on getting to my rehearsal on time. I joined Soul Force Singers. We're doing protest songs. And I will pass it to Paz.
Hi, I'm not sure if you can hear me.
Yes.
Okay, great. Hi, I'm Kaz. She, her pronouns. I am coming to you from the Mojave Desert and trying to keep cool. And I'm working on, well, I'm just getting started on my my mushrooms that I recently received. So thank you. And nice to see all you guys and be back with you tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. And at this point, I'm just gonna take it back, and if you didn't get a chance to introduce yourself and share what you're working on, there will be time later on this evening. Right now, I'm going to share my screen, and can speak. We will watch a time-lapse embroidery video, which I think is really cool because it's leaves, and instead of coloring it all the way in, it kind of has this neat kind of lace kind of pattern to it. So let me share that. Here we go. I will share that link in the chat bar so everybody can see that. I just thought that was a great way to fill in a leaf, and since some of us are working on those with the birds, that might be an approach you might want to take. So thank you everyone for joining. I will now pass it over to Kelly.
Hi, everybody, and welcome. Tonight, we're on week 9 of this series already. And tonight we're going to be looking closer at sustainability and adaptation. So definitely relevant topics to our times. Taking a closer look at the idea of sustainability and trying to kind of build an even more robust framework for thinking about how to cope with the climate crisis, which I think is really useful. We have a few new authors, or a couple new authors tonight. The first reading is from a book by Joanna Macy and Chris Johnstone. It's called Active Hope. And they are writing about really what it takes to not just give up in the face of overwhelming challenges, even and still be realistic, but see ways forward. They talk about visioning and doing your little part to make a difference, and just techniques to cope psychologically, which I really appreciate. The book Active Hope in general, if you're interested, I highly recommend it for more techniques on how to cope with the world today. And Joanna Macy, she's a scholar of Buddhism and general systems theory and deep ecology. So she's an interesting author that we'll start out with tonight. And then we have a reading called from the book, Deep Adaptation. This one was really interesting for me. It's written by an author named Jem Bendel. And he is a professor of sustainability leadership at the Institute of Leadership and Sustainability at the University of Cumbria in the UK. And he's created this whole deep adaptation forum. And yeah, he goes into going beyond just ideas of resilience to like deepen our way of thinking about what it takes to really adapt, which is super interesting. And then we'll touch a little bit again with Fritjof Capra and his Systems View of Life book. This week he talks a bit about sustainability and eco-design principles. I cut down that reading a little bit so that we don't go too much overtime this week, but we'll still get a taste of it, and the full reading will be available for everyone too if they want to continue on with that one. Yeah, so that's tonight. Some good readings tonight. And Jen, now I pass it to Diego, right? To start reading. I need your reassurance. Thank you. Okay, thanks. Okay, Diego, we're ready.
It's pretty small. Is there a way to make it a bit bigger? Thanks.
Chapter 9, Catching an Inspiring Vision. On August 28, 1963, Martin Luther King Jr. delivered one of the best known speeches in history. Half a century later, the words, "I have a dream," are still linked to the vision he shared that day. King described a future in which Black and white children would join hands as brothers and sisters, and in which his own children would be judged by the content of their character rather than the color of their skin. He was identifying a destination that could be reached, a reality that could be created. In the 1960s, the idea that an African American might one day become president of the United States would have been dismissed as just dreaming. But just look at the impact that kind of dreaming can have. Our dreams and visions for the future are essential for navigating through life because they give us a direction to move in. As the Roman philosopher Seneca once remarked, if one does not know to which port one is sailing, no wind is favorable. Moreover, moving toward a destination that excites and inspires us energizes our journey, puts wind in our sails, and strengthens our determination to overcome obstacles. The ability to catch an inspiring vision is therefore key to staying motivated. When we're moved by a vision that we share with others, we become part of a community with a common purpose. Inspiration is often thought of as a fleeting experience striking us in lucky moments, or as a rare strength found in the small number of people thought of as visionaries. In this chapter, we look at how we can foster vision and inspiration using learnable skills. The insights and practices discussed here can help all of us become more inspired and visionary. They strengthen our capacity for going forth in the adventure of the great turning.
How our imagination gets switched off. From an early age, we are schooled in a worldview that values facts over fantasies. The term dreamer is used as a dismissive put-down when someone's ideas are considered unrealistic. Daydreaming in the classroom can even be a punishable offense. To develop our visioning ability, let's start by recognizing how it has become so undervalued. As Quaker futurist Elise Boulding comments, several generations of children have had daydreaming bred out of them. Our literacy is confined to numbers and words. There is no image literacy. With decades of research into how the brain works, we're beginning to understand that our two cerebral hemispheres function in different ways. While the left side thinks in terms of words and rational logic, the right side works more with images and patterns, helping us to integrate complex information and to sense the larger shape of things. Since our educational system focuses almost exclusively on words and numbers, it is as though we are being taught to use only half our brain. A simple first step in developing our visioning ability is to recognize it as a form of intelligence that is both valuable and learnable. To underline the crucial importance of visioning, consider how many aspects of our present reality started out as someone's dream. There was a time when much of America was a British colony, when women didn't have the vote, and when the slave trade was seen as essential to the economy. To change something, we need to first hold in our mind and heart the possibility that it could be different. Stephen Covey, in his best-selling book, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, writes, "Begin with the end in mind is based on the principle that all things are created twice. There's a mental or first creation and physical or second creation to all things." Imagining possible futures is a surefire way to develop foresight. If we're only interested in facts, we limit ourselves to looking at what has already happened, which is a bit like trying to drive a car by looking only in the rearview mirror. To avoid crashing, we need to look where we're going. Since we can't know for sure what will happen, we are limited to considering possibilities, based on applying a combination of experience, awareness of trends, and imagination. While experience equips us well for dealing with familiar situations, our imagination is essential in formulating creative responses to new challenges.
Liberating our imagination. A design principle that boosts creative thinking is what comes before how. First, identify what you'd like to happen. Working out how comes later. If we exclude options just because we can't immediately see how they can happen, we block out many of the more exciting possibilities that might inspire us. An important distinction is to be made between the creative phase, in which we generate ideas and possibilities, and the editing phase, in which we choose and evaluate them. Placing an embargo on editing in this first stage liberates our creativity. Our intention in the creative phase is to catch a vision so compelling that it touches us emotionally. To remain motivated during difficult times, we need to really want our vision to happen. When what we hope for seems beyond our power, however, we are likely to hear a voice inside us saying, "There is no point even thinking about this. It just isn't going to happen." To hold on to an inspiring vision, we need to stop ourselves from shooting it down inside our own minds before it has even given a chance to take form. What helps here is recognizing the difference between static and process thinking. Static thinking assumes that reality is fixed and solid, resistant to change. When people say things such as, the problem is human nature, it's never going to change, or you can't change the system, they're taking this approach. They are viewing situations as if they're like pictures hanging on a wall. If a new idea or way of doing things isn't already in the picture, it is seen as unrealistic. See figure 9.1. This view limits our sense of what is possible. If nothing inspiring is on the horizon, we can easily fall into apathy and resignation. And then the figure says, this is how things are. If something isn't in the picture, it just isn't going to happen. With process thinking, we view reality more as a flow in which everything is continually moving from one state to another. Each moment, like a frame in a movie, is slightly different from the one before. These tiny changes from frame to frame generate the larger changes seen over time. See figure 9.2. If something is not in the picture at the moment, that doesn't mean it won't be later on. This way of conceiving reality sees existence as an evolving story rather than as predefined. Because we can never know for sure how the future will turn out, it makes more sense to focus on what we'd like to have happen and then do our bit to make it more likely. That is what active hope is all about. And then the little figure has a little movie reel, and it says, frame 1, this is how things are now. Frame 2, but choices I make influence what happens next. Frame 3, so what is my hope? How can I be active in moving towards that? It's process thinking. Each moment is like a frame in a movie.
Practices that help us catch inspiration. There was once an inventor who sat for hours every day in a special soundproofed room. With a pencil in his hand and a pad of paper on his desk, he was waiting for ideas. When they came, he would make a note and then return to his waiting. This inventor is modeling 3 practices that can help us catch an inspiring vision. The first is simply creating space. When we're too busy, our attention is so occupied that there is little room for anything new to enter. That is why people often remark that their most inspiring moments come when they are on vacation, out for a walk, or taking a shower. Allowing ourselves quiet moments, even to daydream, opens a space into which inspiring thoughts can flow. Such pauses can be surprisingly productive. Edison came up with many of his inventions while lying on a couch in his workshop. It was a daydream about a snake eating its tail that led German chemist Friedrich Kekule to discover the ring structure of benzene molecules. The second practice for catching inspiration brings together 2 tools freely available to us all: intention and attention. By placing himself in the soundproofed room, the inventor was making himself fully available to any creative impulses that might arise. His heightened alertness was like that of a cat waiting by a mouse hole. If a bright idea was to show itself, he didn't want to miss it. The third practice involved his use of pen and paper. An inspiring thought or vision is like a seed. For it to grow into something, it needs to be planted, nurtured, and revisited often. We can only do that if we remember it. Part of catching inspiration is finding some way of holding on to it. We don't necessarily have to do that through writing, but we need an answer to the question, how will I remember this a year from now?
These three practices are the key ingredients of the guidance systems that helps us find and follow that purposes that calls us. There are many different ways of making space, of focusing our attention and intention to catch any inspiring vision, and of anchoring what comes up so that we don't forget it. We'll be looking at a few approaches in more detail. It is worth experimenting with a range of them to find the ones that suit you best. The core principle here is that we don't have to just passively wait for inspiration. Rather, we can play an active role in inviting it in. We can also train ourselves to become better at this, developing the habit and skill of tuning in to visionary signals. Since the best way of anchoring a vision is to act on it and make it part of our lives, we need a way of linking our larger hopes with specific steps we can take. Visioning, therefore, involves three closely related levels. Number one, what? When looking at a specific situation, what would you like to see happen? Number two, how? How do you see this coming about? This stage involves describing the steps needed for the larger vision to occur and possible pathways by which these steps can take place. Number three, my role. The first level identifies the desired destination, and the second level maps out the story of getting there. And the third identifies your role in this story. What can you do to help the vision come about? Imagining the future we hope for. Feeling that the peace movement was clearer about what it was against than what it was for, Quaker futurist Elise Boulding developed a workshop called Imagining a World Without Weapons. It is structured process moves through the three levels of visioning we described. Here is how she describes it. There are two basic components of this imaging. The first is intentionality. We must allow ourselves not only to wish for, but to intend the good. Our intentions about the future must be serious. So the first exercise in the imaging workshop is to make a list of things we want to see happen in the world 30 years into the future. We choose 30 years because it is far enough into the future so something can have happened, and near enough so that many of us will live into that time. Participants must make their own lists. The lists on it become their intentions. The second component of imaging involves unlocking the total store of imagery in our mental warehouses. To help participants get into that fantasizing mode, the second exercise is to step into a childhood memory. Participants are asked to pick a happy one. I often go back to age 9 and climb an apple tree in our yard. It is essential to use all one's inward senses in experiencing the scene. See the colors, feel the textures, smell the smells, hear the sounds, note the expressions on people's faces. After a couple of minutes of remembering, each participant turns to a neighbor and describes where he or she has been, then listens to where the neighbor has been. Sharing the experience helps to clarify the memory. It is this type of imaging you do when you image the world 30 years from now. You will see a world without weapons around you with the same vividness as fragments from restored experiences get recombined in a new kind of movie reel inside your head.
As preparation for moving into our preferred version of the future, the third stage of the workshop invites us to imagine ourselves standing in front of a huge, thick hedge, stretching as far as we can see to the left and right. On the other side of this lies the world we hope for 30 years from now, where the intentions we identified in the first stage have been realized. We can move through or over the hedge any way we want and have a good look around. The goal is to be an observer and to collect information that can be reported back on. After the imaging, we are invited to share with others what we have experienced. The more specific our observations are, the more real the image becomes to the person we're describing it to. So rather than using generalizations such as "no one is hungry," we are encouraged to be specific in describing what we see or hear. Each of us only sees a fragment of this potential future. So the next and fourth part of the workshop involves piecing together information yielded by different people's imaging to build a more coherent picture of what this future offers. How are decisions made? How does education work? The imaging provides clues that groups can build on. Bolding continues, "We are in no way prophesying or predicting or compelling the future by this kind of imaging, any more than we are compelling the future when we pray. The enactment of the future depends on what we do, how we individually and collectively respond to what we envision." Marianne, we can hear you typing.
Oh, wow. I'm very sorry. I thought I was on mute.
There are 2 more parts to the workshop. After spending time working together on developing a vision of our preferred future, we need to remember how we got there. Standing in the world 30 years from now, we look back at how the changes we have just envisioned were brought about. Moving back year by year, what happened? As we trace back to the present moment, we reconstruct a history of the preceding 30 years from the perspective of this possible future. Finally, we need to see the role we play in this process. Looking at the different areas of our lives, what are we doing that helps build the future we hope for? There will be many things, and some might stand out. What are they? Imaginary hindsight. A powerful mental shift takes place when we stop telling ourselves why something can't happen. When we can envision a hoped-for future, we strengthen our belief that it is possible. By inhabiting this vision with all our senses, imagining what colors and shapes we see, the expressions on people's faces, the sounds we hear, the smells, taste, and feel of this future, we bring ourselves there in a way that activates our creative, visionary, and intuitive faculties. As the poet Rumi once wrote, "Close both eyes to see with the other eye." Research has shown that when people approach a problem by imaging that it has already been solved and then look back from this imagined future, they are more creative and detailed in describing potential solutions. Rob Hopkins used this imaginary hindsight approach when founding the transition movement. He told us, "The idea didn't emerge fully formed all at once. It was more a case of thinking, I wonder what would happen if, and then imagining what a permaculture response to the challenge of peak oil would look like, particularly a response that could easily catch on around the world." The idea that each community could develop its own energy descent plan grew out of this visioning process. The starting point is an image of what a community would look like if it were no longer dependent on oil. How would it function? What would people eat? How would its economy, healthcare, and education systems work? Then a trail is traced back in time from that possible future, marking key developments along the way. The pathway sketched out offers the beginnings of an energy descent plan by which the community can wean itself off oil dependence. Finally, as in Bolding's model, we end in the present with our lives here and now, looking forward and identifying how we can play our part in the transition process. Imaginary hindsight can be applied to a range of timescales. If we're facing a challenge in the next 24 hours, we can imagine a successful resolution a day from now, and then look back from that point at what we did. The story of how we rose to the challenge directs our attention to the steps we need to take.
The Storytellers Convention. It can be fun as well as illuminating to play with this imaginary hindsight process through the use of storytelling. When giving talks, Chris sometimes guides audiences in imaginary time travel to a hoped-for future hundreds of years from now. He invites them into the fantasy that they are at a gathering of storyteller historians, where in pairs they take turns sharing their stories of the Great Turning. Taking just a few minutes each way, they tell the tales they may have heard as children about that historic period in the early 21st century when human society seemed on the path to collective suicide. Though things didn't look too promising at first, a widespread awakening occurred, and huge numbers of people rose to the challenge of creating the life-sustaining society familiar to the storytellers now. After sharing their stories, the audience travels back to the present time, carrying with them a deepened sense of the mythic adventure we are part of. While the stories told are fantasies, some may be close to realities that will occur. When we carry our desired future inside us, it guides and acts through us, helping us to bring it into being. Nightmares can inspire us too. We have been using the word dream to refer to the futures we hope for. However, it is not only positive visions that guide us. Our nightmares can alert us to dangerous conditions and summon us to respond on behalf of life. In the early years of the work that reconnects, Joanna had a particularly lucid and disturbing dream. Engaged at the time in a citizen's lawsuit to stop faulty storage of high-level waste, she had been reviewing public health statistics in localities around nuclear power plants. One night, before going to bed, she had leafed through baby pictures of her 3 children to find a snapshot for her daughter's high school yearbook. That night, she had a nightmare. I behold the 3 of them as they appeared in the old photos. My husband and I are journeying with them across an unfamiliar landscape. The terrain becomes dreary, treeless, and strewn with rocks. Little Peggy can barely clamber over the boulders in the path. Just as the going is getting very difficult, even frightening, I suddenly realize that by some thoughtless but unalterable prearrangement, their father and I must leave them. I can see the grimness of the way that lies ahead of them, bleak as a Martian landscape and with a flesh-burning sickness in the air. I am maddened with sorrow that my children must face this ordeal without me. I kiss them each and tell them we will meet again, but I know no place to name where we will meet. Perhaps another planet, I say. Innocent of terror, they try to reassure me, ready to be off. Removed, and from a height in the sky, I watch them go, 3 small solitary figures trudging across that angry wasteland, holding one another by the hand and not stopping to look back. In spite of the widening distance, I see with a surrealist precision the ulcerating of their flesh. I see how the skin bubbles and curls back to expose raw tissue as they doggedly go forward, the boys helping their little sister across the rocks. When Joanna mentioned this dream in an article, the dread of a mother seeing her children left behind in a barren, toxic world struck a strong chord with readers, many of them writing to share similar nightmares and their own fears for our world.
Oof. Well, that is the ending of the of that reading. It started out really hopeful and then left us on a dark note, so that we need to pull ourselves back towards the visioning. But we have a couple more readings to help guide us there. So we'll look at deep adaptation next.
Framing after denial. Sorry, Diego. As a sense of calamity grows within the environmental movement, some argue against a focus on carbon reductionism for how it may limit our appreciation of why we face this tragedy and what to do about it. Eisenstein, 2018. I agree that climate change is not just a pollution problem, but an indicator of how our human psyche and culture became divorced from our natural habitat. However, that does not mean we should deprioritize the climate situation for a broader environmental agenda. If we allow ourselves to accept that a climate-induced form of economic and societal collapse is now likely, then we can begin to explore the nature and likelihood of that collapse. That is when we discover a range of different views. Some frame the future as involving a collapse of this economic and social system, which does not necessarily mean a complete collapse of law, order, identity, and values. Some regard that kind of collapse as offering a potential upside in bringing humanity to a post-consumerist way of life that would be more conscious of relationships between people and nature. Eisenstein, 2013. Some even argue that this reconnection with nature will generate hitherto unimaginable solutions to our predicament. Sometimes that view comes with a belief in the power of spiritual practices to influence the material world according to human intent. The perspective that natural or spiritual reconnection might save us from catastrophe is, however, a psychological response one could analyze as a form of denial. Some analysts emphasize the unpredictable and catastrophic nature of this collapse, so that it will not be possible to plan a way to transition at either collective or small-scale levels to a new way of life that we might imagine as tolerable, let alone beautiful. Those people who consider that we face, quote, near-term human extinction can draw on the findings of geologists that the last mass extinction of life on Earth, where 95% of species disappeared, was due to methane-induced rapid warming of the atmosphere. Although a far distance from inevitable human extinction, two reputable climate scientists have calculated that the human race now has a 1 in 20 chance of going extinct this century. With each of these framings, collapse, catastrophe, extinction, people describe different degrees of certainty. Different people speak of a scenario being possible, probable, or inevitable. In my conversations with both professionals in sustainability or climate and others not directly involved, I have found that people choose a scenario and a probability depending not on what the data and its analysis might suggest, but what they are choosing to live with as a story about this topic. This parallels findings in psychology that none of us are purely logic machines, but merge information into stories about how things relate and why. None of us are immune to that process. Currently, I have chosen to interpret the information as indicating inevitable collapse, probable catastrophe, and possible extinction. I do not prove in this chapter that societal collapse is inevitable, as that would require more discussion of complex social, economic, political, and cultural processes. But it is my personal conclusion from an overview of these factors, which I have not yet published, and which seem reasonable to share with the reader given the seriousness of the matter. There is a growing community of people who conclude we face inevitable human extinction and treat that view as a prerequisite for meaningful discussions about the implications for our lives right now. For instance, there are thousands of people on Facebook groups who believe human extinction is near. In such groups, I've witnessed how people who doubt extinction is either inevitable or coming soon are disparaged by some participants for being weak and deluded. This could reflect how some of us may find it easier to believe in a certain than an uncertain story, especially when the uncertain future would be so different to today that it is difficult to comprehend. reflection on the end of times, or eschatology, is a major dimension of the human experience, and the total sense of loss of everything one could ever contribute to is an extremely powerful experience for many people. How they emerge from that experience depends on many factors, with loving kindness, creativity, transcendence, anger, depression, nihilism, and apathy all being potential responses. Given the potential spiritual experience triggered by sensing the imminent extinction of the human race, we can appreciate why a belief in the inevitability of extinction could be a basis for some people to come together.
In my work with mature students, I have found that inviting them to consider collapse as inevitable, catastrophe as probable, and extinction as possible has not led to apathy or depression. Instead, in a supportive environment where we have enjoyed community with each other, celebrating ancestors and enjoying nature before then looking at this information and possible framings for it, something positive happens. I have witnessed a shedding of concern for conforming to the status quo and a new creativity about what to focus on going forward. Despite that, a certain discombobulation occurs and remains over time as one tries to find a way forward in a society where such perspectives are uncommon. Continued sharing about the implications as we transition our work and lives is valuable. One further factor in the framing of our situation concerns timing. This also concerns geography. Where and when will the collapse or catastrophe begin? When will it affect my livelihood in society? Has it already begun? Although it is difficult to forecast and impossible to predict with certainty, that does not mean we should not try. The current data on temperature rise at the poles and impacts on weather patterns around the world suggest we are already in the midst of dramatic changes that will impact massively and negatively on agriculture within the next 20 years. Impacts have already begun. That sense of near-term disruption to our ability to feed ourselves and our families and the implications for crime and conflict adds another level to the discombobulation I mentioned. Should you drop everything now and move somewhere more suitable for self-sufficiency? Should you be spending time reading the rest of this chapter? Should I even finish writing it? Some of the people who believe that we face inevitable extinction believe that no one will read this chapter because we will see a collapse of civilization in the next 12 months when the harvests fail across the Northern Hemisphere. They see societal collapse leading to immediate meltdowns of nuclear power stations and thus human extinction being a near-term phenomenon, certainly not more than 5 years from now. The clarity and drama of their message is why inevitable near-term human extinction, INTHE, has become a widely used phrase online for discussions about climate collapse. Although I do not currently agree with them, writing about that perspective makes me sad. Even 4 years after I first let myself consider near-term extinction properly, not as something to dismiss, it still makes my jaw drop, eyes moisten, and air escape my lungs. I have seen how the idea of INTHE can lead me to focus on truth, love, and joy in the now, which is wonderful, but how it can also make me lose interest in planning for the future. And yet I always come around to the same conclusion. We do not know. Ignoring the future because it is unlikely to matter might backfire. Running for the hills to create our own eco-community might backfire. But we definitely know that continuing to work in the ways we have done until now is not just backfiring, it is holding the gun to our own heads. With this in mind, we can choose to explore how to evolve what we do without any simple answers. In my post-denial state, shared by increasing numbers of my students and colleagues, I realized that we would benefit from conceptual maps for how to address these questions. I therefore set about synthesizing the main things people talked about doing differently in light of a view of inevitable collapse and probable catastrophe. This is what I offer now as the Deep Adaptation Agenda.
the Deep Adaptation Agenda. For many years, discussions and initiatives on adaptation to climate change were seen by environmental activists and policymakers as unhelpful to the necessary focus on carbon emissions reductions. That view finally changed in 2010 when the IPCC gave more attention to how societies and economies could be helped to adapt to climate change. And the United Nations Global Adaptation Network was founded to promote knowledge, sharing, and collaboration. 5 years later, the Paris Accord between the member states produced a global goal on adaptation, GGA, with the aim of enhancing adaptive capacity, strengthening resilience, and reducing vulnerability to climate change, with a view to contributing to sustainable development and ensuring an adequate adaptation response in the context of the global temperature goal. Countries committed to develop national adaptation plans, NAPs, and to report on their creation to the UN. Since then, the funding being made available to climate adaptation has grown, with all the international development institutions active on adaptation finance. In 2018, the International Fund for Agricultural Development, the African Development Bank, the Asian Development Bank, the Global Facility for Disaster Reduction and Recovery, and even the World Bank each agreed major financing for governments to increase the resilience of their communities. Some of their projects include the Green Climate Fund, which was created to provide lower income countries with assistance. Typical projects include improving the ability of small-scale farmers to cope with weather variability through the introduction of irrigation and the ability of urban planners to respond to rising sea levels and extreme rainfall events through the re-engineering of drainage systems, Climate Action Program of 2018. These initiatives are falling short of the commitments made by governments over the past 8 years. And so more is being done to promote private bonds to finance adaptation, as well as stimulate private philanthropy on this agenda. These efforts are paralleled by an increased range of activities under the umbrella of disaster risk reduction, which has its own international agency, the United Nations Office for Disaster Risk Reduction. The aim of its work is to reduce the damage caused by natural hazards like earthquakes, floods, droughts, cyclones, and reducing sensitivity to these hazards, as well as increasing the capacity to respond when disasters hit. That focus means significant engagement with urban planners and local governments. In the business sector, this disaster risk reduction agenda meets the private sector through the well-established fields of risk management and business continuity management. Companies ask themselves what the points of failure might be in their value chains and seek to reduce those vulnerabilities or the significance of something failing. Given the climate science we discussed earlier, some people may think this action is too little and too late. Yet, if such action reduces some harm temporarily, that will help people just like you and me, and therefore such action should not be disregarded. Nevertheless, we can look more critically at how people and organizations are framing the situation and the limitations that such framing may impose. The initiatives are typically promoting resilience rather than stability. Definitions of resilience within the sector are surprisingly upbeat. For instance, the Stockholm Resilience Center explains that resilience is the capacity of be it an individual, a forest, a city, or an economy to deal with change and continue to develop. It is about how humans and nature can use shocks and disturbances like a financial crisis or climate change to spur renewal and innovative thinking. In offering that definition, they are drawing on concepts in biology where ecosystems are observed to overcome disturbances and increase their complexity. Two issues require attention at this point. First, the upbeat allegiance to development, quote, development and quote, progress in certain discourses about resilience may not be helpful as we enter a period where material, quote, progress may not be possible. And so aiming for it might become actually counterproductive. Second, apart from some limited soft skills development, the initiatives under the resilience banner are nearly all focused on physical adaptation to climate change, rather than considering a wider perspective on psychological resilience. In psychology, resilience is the process of adapting well in the face of adversity, trauma, tragedy, threats, or significant sources of stress, such as a family and relationship problems, serious health problems, or workplace and financial stressors. It means, quote, bouncing back from difficult experiences. How a person bounces back after difficulties or loss may be through a creative reinterpretation of identity and priorities. The concept of resilience in psychology does not, therefore, assume that people return to how they were before. Given the climate reality we now face, this progressivist framing of resilience is more useful for a deeper adaptation agenda.
In pursuit of a conceptual map of deep adaptation, we can conceive of resilience of human societies as the capacity to adapt to changing circumstances so as to survive with valued norms and behaviors. Given that some analysts are concluding that societal collapse is now likely, inevitable, or already occurring, the question becomes, what are the valued norms and behaviors that human societies will wish to maintain as they seek to survive? That highlights how deep adaptation will involve more than resilience. It brings us to a second area of this agenda, which I have named relinquishment. It involves people and communities letting go of certain assets, behaviors, and beliefs when retaining them could make matters worse. Examples include withdrawing from coastlines, shutting down vulnerable industrial facilities, or giving up expectations for certain types of consumption. The third area can be called restoration. It involves people and communities rediscovering attitudes and approaches to life and organization that our hydrocarbon-fueled civilization eroded. Examples include rewilding landscapes so they provide more ecological benefits and require less management, changing diets back to match the seasons, rediscovering non-electronically powered forms of play, and increased community-level productivity and support. A fourth area for deep adaptation is what could be termed reconciliation, in recognition of how we do not know whether our efforts will make a difference, while we also know that our situations will become more stressful and disruptive ahead of the ultimate destination for us all. How we reconcile with one another and with the predicament we must now live with will be key to how we avoid creating more harm by acting from suppressed panic. Bendel, 2019. It is not my intention in this chapter to map out more specific implications of a deep adaptation agenda. Indeed, it is impossible to do so, and to attempt it would assume we are in a situation for calculated attempts at management, when what we face is a complex predicament beyond our control. Rather, I hope the deep adaptation agenda of resilience, relinquishment, and restoration can be a useful framework for community dialogue in the face of climate change. Resilience asks us, how do we keep what we really want to keep? Relinquishment asks us, what do we need to let go of in order to not make matters worse? Restoration asks us, what can we bring back to help us with the coming difficulties and tragedies? Reconciliation asks, with what and with whom can we make peace as we face our shared mortality? In 2017, part of this deep adaptation agenda was used to frame a festival of alternatives organized by Peterborough Environment City Trust. It included a whole day devoted to exploring what relinquishment could involve. As such, it allowed more open conversation and imagination than a narrower focus on resilience. Further events are planned across the United Kingdom. Whether it will be useful framing for a broader level policy agenda is yet to be seen. Adaptation agenda relate to the broad conceptual framework of sustainable development. It is an explicitly post-sustainability framing and part of the restoration approach to engaging with social and environmental dilemmas, as I outlined elsewhere. Vandell, Sutherland, and Little, 2017.
Research futures in the face of climate tragedy. I was only partly joking earlier when I questioned why I was even writing this chapter. If all the data and analysis turn out to be misleading and this society continues nicely for the coming decades, then this chapter will not have helped my career. If the predicted collapse comes within the next decade, then I won't have a career. It is the perfect lose-lose. I mentioned this to highlight how it will not be easy to identify ways forward as
Diego?
Diego's frozen now too.
Cliffhanger.
It's the collapse has begun.
The lose-lose cliffhanger.
Lose. Join us next week.
Whoa, what was that? Was that just me or did everyone get kicked out?
No,
I think it was just you. Your cue was the lose scenario, and then
I heard you and then I saw everyone freeze at the same time and then my Zoom just like quit. Like I just took me to my desktop and then it brought me back. Okay, I'm sorry. Let's
this
get
is
back.
the vortex for sure. They seek to survive. That highlights how deep adaptation will.
Lauren. So, okay, so we're back. We're down at the bottom of this.
Oh
page.
yeah.
And Diego, yeah, this is perfect lose. I mentioned this, and then we go to the next page, Diego. There we go.
All right.
And the highlight is where we end.
Academic researchers and educators in the field of organizational sustainability. For the academics reading this chapter, most of you will have increasing teaching loads in areas where you are expected to cover certain content. I know you may have little time and space for reinventing your expertise and focus. Those of you who have a mandate to research might discover that the deep adaptation agenda is not an easy topic for finding research partners and funders. This restrictive situation was not always the reality faced by academics. It is the result of changes in higher education that are one expression of an ideology that has made the human race so poor at addressing a threat to its well-being and even existence. It's an ideology that many of us have been complicit in promoting if we have been working in business schools. It's important to recognize that complicity before considering how to evolve our research in the face of climate tragedy.
Oh, there I am. Okay. Whew. Diego we're gonna have a Diego interlude moment where we take a little break. And I feel like it's a good amount of time to maybe have a little discussion and do our current events as well afterwards. So Diego is going to unpack a bit more this idea of deep adaptation because I think it intrigued us both. It was kind of, for me, it built it was going beyond the idea of sustainability, which is like continuing something the same, recognizing it's not going to continue. We're not going to be able to continue the same, and even going beyond the idea of resilience. So just to kind of dive into that concept a little bit more, what some of your thoughts, Diego?
Yeah, so one thing I noticed about that reading was that it kind of takes you through these different developments, where first you have sort of the early environmental movement that's talking about it identifies the climate problem as a really localized, particular mechanistic problem that has a specific solution, which is carbon emissions. If we can reduce our carbon emissions, then everything else will be fine. That's the only problem we have. And so this is the one thing that needs to be tweaked so that the machine can keep on turning. But then it transitioned to this idea about adaptation to climate change, and therefore like creating resilient structures, systems, economies. Hate to say it, but that's sort of more of the sustainability. That's where suddenly this one particular problem becomes something that's global, which affects things that are like, it becomes interdisciplinary. It starts affecting aspects of life and what the
Oh no. He's
Oh
gone.
no, another cliffhanger Diego moment. He was just about to tell us what the meaning of it all. Well,
And
okay.
he's not even in the library.
Was that?
He's not even in the library.
I see him. I see him. But anyway, he's frozen. So we'll just wait till he gets back on, and in the meantime, there he is.
Oh, I'm so sorry. I don't know why that keeps happening. How disruptive.
Okay, it's technology. It's normal
I
to
hate
have
technology.
weird things happen that make you crazy.
Anyway, it's very much still, how much of what I said got cut off? Because I think I talked for a while without noticing. In any case.
Yeah, no, not very much. I think
Okay.
you were, yeah.
It was right after you said something about economics and put a little disclaimer on it. Couple sentences.
That's the point at which this problem of climate change starts reaching into other areas beyond just environmental concern. And then that sort of gives rise to resilience discourse, sustainability. How can we make our systems able to survive or persist through climate change? And that's very much still tied to this idea of progressivism, of increasing, in the most like Western neoliberal terms, like the material quality of life, the economic growth, like all that stuff was still seen as a priority to be safeguarded against these risks that are coming around as a result of climate change. And then finally, the change from that to deep adaptation is this idea that, the problem isn't just the problem isn't just that our systems are facing dissolution or risks as a result of climate change, or that we have this one particular problem on our hands, but that everything that we're doing that we continued along with, that we see as a status quo, that was previously valuable to us or not, but is itself the thing that needs to be changed, that needs to be done away with, that needs to be relinquished in order to like fully come to terms with what's going on here. And the reading uses the near-term human extinction as a sort of as a way of justifying the thought about this, of considering this question, because it's a really stark, clear problem and a consequence, and really like it couldn't be in more clear terms, the end point of everything. Like that's the point at which everything else becomes relevant. So if that's going to happen, then we really have to confront this. But I think that just purely looking at it in an ecological way, near-term human extinction doesn't even have to happen for there to be a equivalent or commensurate problem with ecology, a consequence, like a loss of biodiversity, a mass extinction, all this stuff that's integral to how ecosystems on Earth work, on how biodiversity is maintained and persists on Earth. That could be seen as enough of a consequence to make us to justify coming to terms with this anyway. So I think that there's useful insights to be taken from both the near-term human extinction inspired consideration of this and the holistic biosphere motivated way of coming at it too. And those two things are definitely not separate from one another. But I think more than anything, this made me want to know what all of you think about it. So if we have time, Kelly, then
Totally.
maybe everyone can, or anyone who wants to talk can share their thoughts about this.
Yeah, and that was actually one of the questions that I had forgotten to mention at the beginning of our session today, but just, I don't know, I think the concept of deep adaptation is provocative, just the framing of it and what it means to go beyond kind of the normal rhetoric of sustainability and resilience to take on other dimensions of thinking. And I think, Diego, you did a great job of highlighting some of the key elements that this author talks about, like renunciation or reconciliation and relinquishment. Those ideas are super, super important. Like relinquishment, I think, is something that we all have to come to terms with, in regards to, like you said, some of these premises of progress, of continual development. I mean, those need to be relinquished and let go of and reframed. Like, that has to be part of our adaptation awareness and agenda. And then, I also find the idea of reconciliation very provocative because it brings in this feeling of empathy and recognizing that we have to reconcile what we've done also and ask like almost be in a state of asking forgiveness at a certain point of like that kind of mental state of like not just of trying to reconcile deep injustices that have been happening. So keeping that at least in front of our minds, I think it adds a lot of dimension to the idea of sustainability, which to me has connotations of staying stagnant in a certain sustainable pace of doing things in the same way. So those are a few reflections I had, and I just curious what the idea of deep adaptation brought up for other people and how you might describe it from your point of view. It could even be personal, like the deep adaptation personally or collectively. Like what do you see in that space that needs to be taken on and embraced?
I find this an incredibly provocative a text because I can see that many different layers can coexist in my life all at once. Like I can experience a conversation about reconciliation and resignation and in different formats, but at the same time, like pedagogically in terms of how we teach or how we talk in the world, these are very active choices that you can make individually, but when you're part of a department, there's also a lot of status quo that is like, it can take you down a rabbit hole to like end up being like pedagogically immersed in a conversation about a department instead of big picture thinking about what it is that we're actually, going through. I know in the work that I'm doing currently with Bending the River, it's taken me 2 years to apply for an adaptation to a permit. 2 years, because I refused to put plastic in the river when I discovered that under the river, there's another river and that there's floodplain material in it. 2 years for that, right? And on the 5th day, we've been stopped again. Do you know why? Because they saw that we had pottery. The lid that we put in 2 years ago, they saw a picture that there is pottery in the print that we put in the river. And now they want to send professionals to assess whether these are native pottery, right? I'm mentioning this because the conversation I would really like to have is about systems, right? With the Army Corps. The whole point of doing this work is to actually be active with the agencies that control our water on a federal level, right? To sort of not sit back and just, create academic designs or like movies, but to actually get involved. And the gap between the conversation that I'm hoping to have and what they're hoping to have is so large that if I were to talk to them about these pedagogical ideas, like about resistance or resignation to climate change, it's like, what? They're organized around status quo. And I think that's the big challenge for all of us, is how do we acknowledge that we may have to operate on all of these fronts all the time, in many different ways, giving up the idea that there is any one way to think, but to actually imagine that all of these things need to be thought through so that pedagogically one can introduce the potential for some kind of micro change to occur.
I think that's right on, Lauren. And it really shows that comes from direct experience, being involved with this.
I didn't mean to stop you, Diego. You should finish your thought.
I'm sorry, I finished my thought. I didn't even hear you.
It's really important to workshop these things with each other. That's why I'm sharing on a personal experience, because it's not personal that they're stopping our flow, no pun intended, but it is important to acknowledge that the conversation that they're having with our project has pretty much nothing to do with our project. So the reality is that the narrative I'm living in and the narratives that they're living in are happening at the same place at the same time, and they have complete control over its life and death. Complete. And that is, I'm sure, something that other people, writers, teachers, artists are coming up with all the time, is that we're in a relational field with our commons. We're not living as farmers anymore, or hunter-gatherers, or, we're not in charge of having a good year or bad year being how we or our family survive. We're part of a systems collapse. And it's not negotiable, right? It's happening. We're living in it. And we have to, I have to reconcile myself with that all the time, which is why I try and carve out these spaces for myself with you guys, with learning and mending, because for me, that's the point where I can reconcile, right? Is to read books and to talk about it and to acknowledge through the practice of conversation. These first person narratives we're all having about the choices that we're making in the work we do and the way that we approach the world and trying to walk the walk, and know that you may have no control over whether you can even walk that walk. Because of the pace of the collapse and because of the pace of the stagnation. Because the stagnation is real and very frustrating.
That was really, really well put, Lauren.
Thank you. Thank you, Diego.
Yeah, I feel like you channeled something that really needed to be said. The stagnation, it's almost a momentum in the opposite direction. It's like worse than stagnation. There's a certain momentum, and the framing, it's interesting because framing does matter. You were saying that the narrative that you have and the narrative that the city and the policymakers have are very, very different. You're having to translate deep resilience, reconciliation, relinquishment intentions into their language, which is really stifling. It's interesting. Translating these ideas into action, it's almost like you have to translate them into another form of language that then they lose some of the magic and people don't understand the essence of what you're trying to do anymore because you're in engineering language. You're I don't know. Yeah, I just can imagine your frustration with that. I really can. And I mean, yeah.
But also, Lauren, and not to get so cliche, but like what's so inspiring about this project is that you actually have been able to challenge systems and bureaucracies that are, I mean, that are problematic on so many levels, but are fundamentally, if not at their origin, intended to actually like de-democratize this process and keep people away from actually having a voice in change, then that's what they're being utilized for now. And I think there's an evolution there as well, right? From what I mean, you can see it in like the US, yeah, I mean, look at any federal bureaucracy basically, right?
Well, a few years ago, Jaime and I accepted an invitation from the Army Corps to go to Puerto Rico after that big hurricane there because they wanted to build the success story of the LA River in Puerto Rico. And we went there in order to say, well, there's good news and bad news, right? The good news is the LA River has been a tremendous success story at keeping lives and property from being destroyed by floods for nearly 80 years. The bad news is that's not going to work in Puerto Rico right now because of climate change. You're going to get these storms bigger and more ferocious all the time. And the strategy of a storm control channel on the low ground of where all the cities are in Puerto Rico is not going to work, right? So they were like, well, what do you recommend? So we recommended what Newton Harrison recommended we recommend, which was based on it's time to abandon ship. We need to move to higher ground in Puerto Rico. Spend your money thinking about syntropic farming, which is in those forests, plant a food shed around existing trees and move your power supply from the coastline and accept that that is what's going on, that you're not going to solve the 100-year storm that the LA River is designed to take is going to be an annual storm in Puerto Rico, and they're going to get worse. So there's no standard engineering solution to that problem. And, thankfully, the Army Corps wanted to host that conversation in Puerto Rico because that was a good thing. And we actually met quite a few activists that are part of a commune in Puerto Rico that we were then able to financially support in some of their thinking, not ours, some of their thinking on similar line about adaptation, right? The what's this unit come? A deep adaptation, right?
Deep adaptation, exactly. Yeah.
I think that the deep adaptation concept is happening, but it's ironically happening in the places that have been most abandoned by the bureaucracies. You know, like places like Puerto Rico, where they're not waiting on handouts from the US government to fix things. So, but it is interesting that those people who are having those experiences will end up being knowledgeable, knowledge sharers.
Totally.
But I mean, like, look what's going on in New Orleans right now, or Louisiana. You know, it's really wishful thinking to think that we can resolve these hurricanes coming in, and it goes really deep without people actually tackling deep adaptation and sort of saying it's okay to feel demoralized and that you may need to become a climate refugee. We have to talk about these things in order to kind of bring these things out into the open and really strategize about, well, where would you go? What would you do? That deep adaptation idea is really fascinating to me. And I think if I don't drop out of my own class, I'm starting tomorrow.
That's
a deep adaptation way of looking at it, which is to really challenge all those students to not, you know, do anything that isn't. Don't even bother doing any school projects for me that isn't about deep adaptation, because I don't see what the point is, really. Well, that's a whole other story. I'll take my private therapy time with that.
Lauren, sorry, was that someone else?
Nope, that was you.
Well, did you say that the Army Corps wanted to reproduce what they did to the LA River in Puerto Rico?
Yeah.
They're confronted with what happened, and that's the solution that they suggest for that.
And they're building it right now.
Oh my God.
That's,
that is
They're building
so...
a concrete river in the city port in Puerto Rico, despite the fact that it's completely preposterous, right?
Not only is it preposterous in the face of climate change, it's preposterous in the face of ecology that you would do that and think that somehow reproducing the same mistakes that have put us in such a vulnerable, destructive position are going to result in anything other than more of the same. That's not surprising to me, but it's still,
it's like, it's real dysfunctional family behavior, right? Like act as if, normalize, and somehow the problem will seem like it's going to disappear, and make everybody feel like off the wall radicals who are actually talking about like what's actually happening. You know, Puerto Rico is importing literally everything it needs for all of its citizens to eat, have medicine from outside the country. It's become a debtor nation. And it could grow food there. But there are people thinking through all of these things who are living there, but the whole idea of the colonization idea, right, in a place like Puerto Rico, where you're going to enforce an outmoded, clearly not usable strategy to manage flood control is, you know, it makes you feel kind of crazy, you know, when you listen to this, because you wonder how the gap between all the things we know, all the things people are writing, all the things that we're all trying to do to adapt in our own lives to, you know, the downward spiral of civilization that we're living through. And it makes it really difficult to know how to navigate pedagogically, intellectually, personally, even within family systems.
I just have to say, Lauren, the what you brought up about the gap that you're mentioning between what we can imagine and some of what Joanna Macy was talking about what we can envision as alternate futures. the gap between that and being and in universities, them talking about these ideas and the actual implementation, the engineering language, the policy making, it's almost like, I don't know why I keep coming back to language and codes. It's like, it feels like it's embedded in the way they think in their language, that they just take, they copy and paste language. Like, oh, okay, so these engineers did this to the LA River and they were able to get X amount of water for a short period of time and avoid floods. And then they copy and paste that again. And it's like, I don't know, the gap between the evolution of ideas that I see in my PhD program and in the university system and what's actually being implemented on the ground is real. And that's why I appreciate what you're trying to do, Lauren, as frustrated as you must be, because you're actually doing the hard work of translating and working with these people and systems where everybody else is critiquing them from the outside and proposing, luckily, some are proposing alternate ideas instead of just critiquing. I appreciate when people propose alternate ideas, but to engage and try to actually change them, that's where things are very rare. Actions are very rare. So
I just wanted to thanks Kelly for bringing back the Joanna Macy text, although it ended on a pretty strange note. But I've had the great opportunity to participate in. I've never studied with her or practiced with her, but have done several of her practice exercises several times, and they are extremely powerful and transformative. And I know that she did a lot of work in Chernobyl, and where people were just completely devastated, and she was able to transform hearts and minds in a brilliant way. I mean, I've done the same exercises several times, and each time I am as deeply touched and driven to tears and transformation from her work. So these kinds of things that are so, talk therapy is so disrespected and such, and yet, it starts to be recognized at some point. I know that I have friends that tried to introduce some of her techniques into LAUSD, and they met with a really frightening demise. And so, I think that these kind of transformative, I would even in Joanna Macy's case say that it's shamanistic practices, of course, are just completely taboo, and Joanna's work is more like therapy, but again, that's just as taboo with most people. So anyway,
but there's a practicality to that too, don't you think, Roxanne? In those questions, it seems like completely legitimate to ask students to think and to think through the practicalities of coming up with a result, and then how did you get there?
Yeah, it's completely
perfect.
Practical. Yeah, yeah. And that's how things are done. I mean, ultimately, it's just somehow she seems so extreme for so many people, and it's not. We will have to go there.
I think it's the part about the hedge, I think, is where she gets controversial. The climb over the hedge or get over it however you want. That's where it's in the sort of shamanistic territory, which works fine for me. But if the just envisioning a result and then stepping backward is the way everything gets done.
That's leverage.
The way you use thinking. Yeah.
That's exactly what leverage is.
Yeah, I think that's great, Olan, because I think what she was pointing to is when she says active hope, I think she's pretty I've read that whole book, by the way, and it is really worthwhile reading at this point in our lives. It's worthwhile reading. And I think what she is almost trying to do is say, instead of imagining a future where everything just collapses and then your creativity collapses with that and your motivation and your inspiration, like we don't know we don't know. We know we're on a trajectory. We know we're going in not a good direction. We know that much, but we don't know what's going to happen. And therefore, if we don't know, let's not choose that scenario to pin all our hopes to and just do nothing. Like, let's each nudge the system in our own ways, through our own methods, as much as we can, as best we can, and as little small things as we can. And that is, you know, you can die knowing that you did that. You know,
It's almost like William James's, you know, well, if I have the choice between not believing in God and believing in God, I'd rather believe in God. I'm not saying it's just like, okay, let's think positively. We can make a change. You know, I don't know if you've heard his argument, but it's
yeah, that's exactly right. So it's the same thing as like Einstein said something like that too. You can either believe reality is a miracle or you can believe it's not, and like, and they're the same thing, and you just choose, you know. I don't know.
You can believe nothing is a miracle or everything is a miracle, I think.
Thanks a lot.
Yeah,
I knew I was misquoting that, but I had the thought.
By the way, Emily, thanks for making the video about the performance where we put the pots in the river. We just sent it to the Army Corps, by the way.
Perfect.
So you never know who's going to.
We have the evidence. The evidence is there.
Federal government film festival going on.
Thank goodness for documentation.
Whoever knew where that little Vimeo clip would end up.
It's incredible. I'm glad it could be of use.
Yeah, I actually think it's more than of use. I think that the more visual artifacts, like videos like that we can inject, speaking of the small nudges that we make into the consciousness, because we all get affected by visual material. So thanks, Emily, for making sure it's seen and understood. Because I've been watching through Instagram, and when I see those triangles coming out of the LA River, I'm just like, yes. You know,
Shouts out to Cascade here too, who was in the trenches with us in 2019.
Shout out, girl. Shout out. Yeah, you got to document that.
You know, I will say that, you know, you never know where wisdom's going to come to. Like today, I was talking with one of the construction workers who was telling me about something his grandmother in Mexico said to him about tierra respirare. Is that right?
Tierra respira.
Tierra respira. Breathing land, you know. And he was saying that about cobblestone streets as opposed to concrete, and how seeing the water table, like it looks like Club Med down there right now, because under the LA River, there's a pure river flowing, right? So we're sitting by Club Med today, and he was telling me about breathing landscapes. This is a construction worker, right, on the LA River, who immediately knows in his bones, right, what the magic is that's happening there. So, you know, there is that thing where artists and construction workers and those of us who learn through tactile or putting our bodies in space find there's so much more in common than people who don't have contact. And it's so important not to judge people by bureaucracies, right? Because there is no person who is the Army Corps, right? It's a system, and it's our systems that are in this rapid collapse. But the actual individual who's spending his time doing construction work on Army Corps is fully available for, you know, cognitive experienced like almost testimonials about the web of life. He immediately came up to me and we had this terrific conversation about breathing landscapes, which, also that too is true today, right? Both is true. That's why I mean, there's all these layers of performance and pedagogy, because the performance of me being, the other thing that happened today is that at the end of the job, one guy walked by me while I had my GoPro on the tractor. And he said really quickly when he walked by, "Thanks for this work." And I thought to myself, wow, right? That experience of him getting a chance to feel good about something he was doing wasn't lost on me, right? Because there's plenty of work for that construction company. It's not like I was giving them a job and they didn't have one, but they were talking specifically about this experience, which is not their normal situation. And they understand that and are very generous about articulating that. So, I consider the whole thing kind of a performance activation, right? Where you don't know how you're affecting people, even if it never happens. Something happened today on many levels. And I think that's that deep adaptation. When you get in the trenches, you have to adapt in a deep can not only mean like deep down, but deep in the sense that once you get deep and you get into that network, it can be deep complexity, the deep complexity of real, like reality is like, it's really complex. And if you're going to jump in, you kind of just have to like realize that it's going to be complex and unclear.
I just have to say one thing that made me think of is an idea of conversational drift, which is something Newton Harrison talks about. And he talks about conversational drift and in the sense that being in touch with people and having these small moments of recognition of something different it creates something that is outside of your control in terms of you won't know, Lauren, the impact. You won't ever be able, you'll die not knowing the impact of what you're doing. And yet that drift is that again, coming back to those small things that we can contribute. It's like those moments are really, really, it's even the word. I don't even want to say a cliche word of powerful or important. It's something more. It's like
It's a
deep adaptation.
It's a paradigm shift is what I was trying to describe. Hi.
Really?
Hi, Millie.
What I was trying to describe to Lauren last night was that having those interactions with the construction crew in the river, she's creating a powerful paradigm shift for them to actually realize that the work that they're doing is important. It's going to affect the environment in Los Angeles, and even them putting their fingers or their hands where they're laying the concrete or uptaking the concrete, that's powerful. She's creating a paradigm shift within them, within their families, within their communities. So you're absolutely right. The complexity of change is a network of paradigm that just shifted. So super proud to just be part of this project.
Thank you, Millie. That was so great.
Well said, Millie. Thank you.
Kelly, I just want to say I super appreciated this. I know other people have said it, but this was a really exceptional pairing of texts. I think, and Lauren's talking about it too, with like how the frustrations of like systems and like the collapse of systems and the feelings of hopelessness specifically and anger, to want to change, but to not have to be so disenfranchised, all of us at every turn.
I think that I think like for me, and I don't want to like, I'll save this for my therapy too, but like it's easy to, you know, I think as this crisis like continues and like kind of without end, it's easy to lose, I don't know, this is a strange like phenomenon I've been thinking about, my own thoughts of like losing like touch with humanity when humanity actually needs connection the most. And I think I appreciated that she highlights the ways that it like is bringing people together, and I recognize that that is like part of this phenomenon. But for me on like a personal level, it feels, I think part of that is like, for those of us here, I feel like I could make some amount of a generalization of like, we also have a deep empathy and understanding of ecosystems and like animals beyond human animals. And like, there isn't necessarily a hierarchy of like human existence. We recognize how problematic that hierarchy has, the influence of that hierarchy as like ultimate destruction essentially for everything else. And it's really hard to focus on like base humanity, I think, of just like, and cultivating empathy for other humans. Like just, this is like very vulnerable thing to say, but like it is like it becomes more difficult because I think on some level there is this kind of blurring of lines between those systems and those bureaucracies and the disenfranchisement and like the continual disenfranchisement on every level of humanity, that somehow it becomes about how shitty humans are and like about how oppressive, you know, certain identities of humans are. And anyway, it just becomes really difficult to kind of like, I think, extract those thoughts and think about why, like, yeah, I mean, for me, like I feel such a deep compassion for plants and animals, but like less compassion for humans. Anyway, I'm just kind of rambling, but
Okay, you're making so much sense.
Thank you.
Like I just, one quick comment is something Lauren said that I just want to highlight again is we have to be careful not to conflate bureaucracy and individuals. Like she said that, and I actually am like still resonating on what she just said with that, because it's strange. As an individual, you want to do way more, and yet there's these systems and momentum in place with these kind of bureaucratic, like really rigid and not, you know, like it takes courts, like Supreme Court decisions to change some of these things. And yet we feel guilty as individuals too. It's a strange thing. It's not that we shouldn't as individuals take responsibility. So that's the tricky part. It's like that subtlety. But at the same time, conflating humanity, you really think about it, how many acts of incredible love and generosity are happening too. We just, I don't know, as human beings. So it's complex, it's complicated, and it's not one thing, you know.
Yeah, I feel completely guilty that I cannot stop the filibuster on my own. You know, whenever those things come up, stop the filibuster. It's like, yeah.
Exactly. Like if we had, and yet we feel like, oh, if we were collectively combined, if we could organize better, if I was a better organizer, would that mean that I was more effective and therefore I was okay? Like, I don't know. But on an individual level, we are kind of helpless. It's only collectively. And that's why I do appreciate groups like this, because I would be more of an individual person because of my culture and my upbringing. And I love that Lauren actually always provokes community in her work. And that's actually a common thread that I find really, really compelling, because it's not easy. We're all different. Who knows who's going to show up, what's going to happen. And yet, thank God for, I don't know, it's been nourishing for me to know there's other people out there like you guys. So.
Same. And I love what she said about process. I just want to say, bring it back to what I think it was in the first text about hope, and just like how if you kind of extract yourself from this idea of yeah, or maybe adapt to the idea that everything is in process and everything is like this a fluidity. It's not going to be like, oh, we have to do this, we have to topple this patriarchy, we have to do, it's like that kind of detaches you from the real work, or from seeing it maybe more realistically. I don't know, I just appreciated that. Like, it's so hard to be in the process of a continuum of life that is what we are doing actually all the time.
Absolutely. I'll just say a quick thing in terms of process. Like, think about on an individual level, we always want like these amazing changes to happen really quickly, and then you can put it on Instagram and you lost all the weight. But actually the reality is it's really, really slow. Like, things are, and they take patience and perseverance. And like bending the river, for instance, has taken a lot of perseverance and patience. And it's not this phenomenal like thing. And so changing that narrative too, which is actually a colonial narrative of conquering and being the king, and all of a sudden you won, like, to something that is actually more process-based and gathering of the seeds is really important too, as a way of thinking.
Yeah, it kind of got me thinking a little bit about our conversation last week about a couple weeks ago about deep time, and that, seeking that kind of sense of gratification within our own lifetimes may not be possible, but it's a generational thing that we're handing off to the people after us, or we're kind of standing on the shoulders of giants as well, of leading this movement or leading the work forward, and we're kind of just a piece in it. And I think kind of just zooming back in more of a macro perspective, that for us it may seem like an eternity, but it'll be a blip in time in the kind of grand scale of things, and kind of losing or kind of gaining hope again. I think that kind of helps with me, at least, to kind of step back and just realizing that if it doesn't happen in my lifetime, it may happen that something we've helped to contribute in my own lifetime will be kind of picked up and worked on for future generations to come too.
Totally, Kavi.
Thanks for the space, y'all.
Yeah. If you guys, anybody wants to hold on for another 10 minutes or so, I think Kavi picked out a few current events that he might share. Are you up for that, Kavi?
Yeah, absolutely.
That in relation to the readings, we're trying to connect it to real world things and how we can see it all the way through.
Share my screen with you all. Give me just a second.
Millie.
You all see that? Or I hope I'm showing the right screen. It's always a fear of like, I got too many windows open. All right, so I'll kind of go through maybe the first article that's really directly related to what we're talking about here. Is this article, kind of opinion piece on Gizmodo that came up today, and about how to overcome climate dread, and kind of related to our strategies on active hope and different strategies in that way. First, one of the things that kind of came up in this article is to identify your emotions, and there's a gamut of emotions that we're processing around climate change, and to kind of name them individually as well. So maybe it's guilt that we're feeling as individuals as our own behavior, or guilt as for humanity as well, that we're destroying our planet, or maybe even rage at corporations or politicians that are not doing anything, or maybe even fear or scared for loved ones that are threatened by a fire or a flood. And that's kind of naming that emotion and sitting with it has been found to be a little helpful. But then also that guilt is also a really great signifier and about things that we value and what we're guilty about. And sometimes it's a good thing too, that we do care about our climate essentially, or anything else. But it's also, the article kind of cautioned that letting guilt to become too much at our emotional center could also lead to depression, other things like that, that kind of taking our time to not let the overwhelming feelings kick in, but in a way finding a positive motivator rather than a negative one. So when they talked about, the article talked about kind of direct actions you could take, kind of making sure that's focused on a place of love, like what do you love and what do you care about, and how those kind of individual actions you can take, or whether it's phone banking or any individual action you can take in your day-to-day life, is kind of coming from love, a position of love and positivity as well. And go to this article, kind of was related to our Fritjof Capra reading that we can get to, but kind of talking about his reading about learning from nature and nature design and reducing waste. So there's this new technology from a company called Responsive Drip Irrigation. So something called GrowStream, which is they're using so when plants get thirsty, they release a particular chemical into the surrounding soil. I don't know what that chemical is, but I really want to look into more than that further. But the company is using these tubes that are embedded with a pore that can sense those chemicals. And once the plants have enough water, plants have water, they stop emitting that chemical. So essentially with these kind of sensors to check in when the plants need water or not, really reducing the amount of water that is being used versus even drip irrigation. And so it goes directly when the plants need it. And can also be used to provide fertilizer and soil amendments directly through the water into the roots of the plants. And it's actually not that far-fetched off. It's actually being used in Abu Dhabi right now with farmers growing vegetables in the desert. Also, the city of Los Angeles is looking at ways to implement that with urban landscapes, and how the local water utility can actually put this out into use and drastically reduce the amount of water for urban landscapes.
Avi, can I just say, I love that article, because I just read last night about how scientists are starting to report certain clicks from the roots of plants. Wow. So there's certain, yes. And it's not even like, it's like they're actually documenting sound from the roots of plants so it's just interesting to think that we could tune into that a little bit and be able to, work with it and make things better. So that's a great art.
That led me on a kind of wormhole that I went rabbit hole when I went down, that kind of different ways that plants are kind of processing and dealing with emotions too. Like they've detected ultrasonic waves that plants release when their stem is cut or something like that. And there's also chemicals that they release when they're kind of struck with drought and other kind of like severe weather conditions. So they're like actively living and feeling and kind of, with that. So it's really amazing stuff that article led me down to. And then this article from Mother Jones, Think Twice Before You Build That Seawall. This kind of connected back into our conversation about deep adaptation. So this was more of a kind of a critique on climate adaptation method that many cities are looking at today, which doesn't take into account relinquishments or giving up living near coastlines, and kind of also talks about reconciliation, like will our efforts do anything? So this mainly follows a research paper that was published in Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences by some Stanford scientists. And what they were looking at was kind of modeling and looking at the hydrological models to show where rising water would go if a given section of coastline was fortified by a seawall. And this is kind of elementary to think about, but that water has to go somewhere else. And so we think, as different cities across the United States and across the world are thinking about putting up these seawalls to protect major cities, that we're not thinking totally about where that water will go. And it's obviously going to go to less economically rich communities, especially communities of color that cannot afford to put those seawalls around their own landscapes, around their cities. It's a costly measure, and they're thinking of the authors of the paper have kind of estimated that by the year 2100, the U.S. alone is predicted to spend around $300 billion on seawalls across different cities. And lawmakers in Houston are considering a $25 billion wall around Houston. Jakarta is also looking at building a seawall as well. But in kind of a suggesting another approach, the authors of the paper were talking about certain stretches of the coastline can actually take up seawater better than others. Alluvial valleys, for example, as I kind of mentioned in there, where floodplains meet with the sea and act as sponges to kind of pull that water in. So I think what they were suggesting is to kind of funneling our, if we're going to build seawalls, to kind of funnel it towards those more permeable soils that kind of take on this and kind of working in concert with nature rather than against it, to kind of connect back to the Friedhof reading that was going in as well. So that's it for current events here. And I'll share them quickly in the chat as well, so you all can take a look.
Javi, those were particularly good. That last one too, it's like we're spending billions of dollars on seawalls. And I was gonna write in the chat, but I'll just say it. Newton Harrison, I can't help it, I've worked with him for a long time. He'd always say, only fools pick a fight with the ocean. Wise folk dance with the rising tide. I know Lauren and Millie have already heard this because it's true. It's actually true. What are we doing picking a fight with the ocean with these billion-dollar seawalls? Like, anyway, yeah. So thank you for all of that. And so, okay, we have the hardcore people next week, organizations, power, and leadership. We're gonna figure this out one way or another. And thank you all for everything and being here. And I'll see you guys next time. Good night.
Thanks, everyone.
All right, thank you.